All right. So, Professor Roman Galperin, welcome to the Delve podcast. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, congratulations on the publication. Big accomplishment. It's a super interesting study, kind of looking at how workers of different genders react to different managerial practices. And I don't know, I think for the managers out there, there's a lot that they can take away from your particular findings. So, I was trying to think of a fun way to hop into it, but maybe there's no other way than to just jump straight into the weeds.
Let's get straight into it.
So I'm going to start with some basic definitions here. So you're looking specifically at how men and women react to increased incentives and monitoring from their managers. So I wonder if you could just talk a bit about like what kind of incentives and monitoring are we talking about here? What does that mean?
That's a very good question. I think we should be clear about what some of the terms here mean to understand really what the finding is and what the insight is. And I want to start with just giving a bit of a context. So we are studying work of highly qualified knowledge workers. These are patent examiners at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, which is the federal agency that assigns patents to inventions in the U.S. It's a very important agency for innovation economy worldwide. And so there's about 10,000 of those people, and they work in this agency, and their core job is to really look at inventions and decide if a given invention warrants a protection of a patent or not.
Right.
And so these are, again, it's highly sophisticated work because they have to wear two hats, a head of a scientist and a head of a lawyer, essentially, and look at the scientific basis for the invention, find the closest invention to what they're looking at, and then apply some legal framework to decide if the differences between what's been done before and a given invention is enough to warrant a patent. So very sophisticated work and from one standpoint, but from another perspective, they are working in a condition of constant pressure to produce more. So this is a federal agency in the U.S. that's been under pressure for decades at this point because they're not processing these patent applications fast enough. And so these workers face essentially, despite the sophistication of their work, they face essentially the same pressures as someone working on a conveyor belt. So you need to produce faster, you need to make these decisions that take a lot of hours of thinking and research, make these decisions really fast because there's always the next application that awaits a decision. And so getting back to your question, in this context, incentives are in place. These are monetary incentives to work faster, to produce more, to make more decisions per unit of time. And so these incentives are set up, again, very similarly to many other jobs. So that if you work more, you work harder, you somehow get paid more. This is the incentives. The monitoring part is that when we work, especially when we try to work faster, sometimes quality takes a hit. And so it's important for organizations to monitor that the quality is at least at a given standard.
Right.
And so by monitoring, we mean this scrutiny that workers have, scrutiny of their work and the quality of their output.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and this particular area is like super detail oriented, requires very specific expertise. It's it would be easy to make a mistake when you're trying to speed things up and try to, so that's, okay, thank you. That's really fascinating. So how did women and men act differently in response to these, to this monitoring and to these incentives?
This was a fascinating finding for us, is that when an organization sets up these monetary incentives to work faster, they don't affect all workers the same way. So when as a worker, you're promised that you're going to get paid more if you produce more, then it seems that men are much more likely to respond to that by increasing their production than women. At the same time, monitoring, so how closely your work output is watched for quality, also has asymmetric effect across men and women. And so specifically, women seem to be much more sensitive to the quality of their output being watched by managers and peers, or an algorithm. In that women tend to focus much more on maintaining quality, and they slow down their production. So their productivity goes down more so than for men. We're talking about averages here, of course.
Yeah.
Individual workers may differ from that. But if we look at averages across the groups of workers by gender, this is what we find.
So were all of these employees like trained in a similar like field or similar background, or did they all come from the same kinds of sciences? Or I'm just curious, like what commonalities they had there.
This is an excellent question. A lot of times the challenge of studying differences by a demographic group, let's say between men and women at work, is that oftentimes in many organizations, men and women don't necessarily do the same work at the same level, with the same training, with the same expectations, because women tend to choose different occupations than men. There are all sorts of differences in terms of how men are promoted to different positions in organizations compared to women. And so in the end, it's very difficult to find a place where you can compare men and women apples to apples and we're doing the same work in the same way. And so this is one big advantage of the context where we were doing our research, in that the patent agency, effectively all of the patent examiners we're looking at are doing the same work in the same context, at the same level. So we are comparing apples to apples here. This is examiners, these are knowledge workers who do the same tasks under same incentives and monitoring, and then in that context we see these gender differences. And so it's really hard to ascribe those differences to something that's different about the context, or different about the way they treated by the organization, so the nature of the work that they do.
So that kind of ties into my next question, because like you kind of alluded to, just like, because women and men experience the world very differently. Like a woman going through STEM is going to face very different barriers than a man will, and then that cuts with, that intersects with all sorts of other identity markers as well. So like I wonder, and then they carry that with them into the office, into the workplace. So I wonder if that ties into like why they had such different reactions to these pressures.
Yeah, we spent, my co-author, Colleen Stewart, and I, we spent a lot of time thinking about why would women and men have different responses to these monetary incentives and to the quality control that is in place in organizations. So for incentives, it's not unusual to expect that men will be more likely to respond strongly to the promise of being paid more, right, if they work harder. There are traditional gender roles that are present in many societies, including the U.S. And so the cultural image of a provider is more typically associated with the masculine role. Maybe another aspect here is that going after these strong incentives and producing more to get paid more entails some risk. It's a risk of maybe you won't get paid as much as you are counting on by working harder, or maybe there will be maybe the quality will take a hit. And there's some research that shows that men and women may have different tolerance for risk. And so men are more likely to tolerate risks associated with economic benefits than women. Now, if we go to monitoring, it may have different effects, again, on women relative to men, because women's quality tends to be scrutinized more, and especially in the fields where women are underrepresented, where women are a smaller group, they're watched more closely. And so for them to produce something of lower quality may be way more consequential than for their male peers. There's also some evidence that women are penalized harsher for lower quality output. There's some fascinating work that received quite a bit of attention a few years back about men and women in surgery. So the male surgeons, after bad medical outcomes, so when a patient dies during a surgery, the physicians who refer to that surgeon don't seem to refer less to the same surgeon. But if it's a woman surgeon and a patient dies, then the referrals to that surgeon drop a lot. And so there are other examples, but this is one of the more dramatic examples, that for the same dip in quality, it's quite likely that women are penalized way more than men. So there are all these reasons for women to be way more cautious when they perceive that they're watched closely in terms of the quality of the work that they produce in this context.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And then this is kind of where the inequity starts to come in, right? Because like then if you have men who are more comfortable pumping out more work and are less likely to experience severe consequences for it. Like that's like two things that the women are kind of fighting against, because they have to be more careful, so they just can't be as fast. And then because if they do make a mistake, they're going to be reprimanded for it. So that's really interesting. So I guess if you could just talk a bit more about that piece of things, just like what do your findings say about how gender expectations play out in the workplace? Like how should we think about this from an equity angle?
I think the key point that we're making in this paper is that as managers, as organizations, we don't start out with an intent to create inequities. So these incentives, these monitoring policies, they're put in place to create an equal playing field. So the incentives are the same for everyone. It's not that you get paid more if you're a man, or you are penalized harsher if you're a woman. That's not in the policy. The policies are the same.
It just kind of ends up that way.
It ends up this way.
Conditional factors,
Exactly, because the effects that they have when they're joined with the cultural expectations, with the cultural forces at play, that are not in the policies, right? But they're out there in the external world, exactly as you said, that people bring with them to the workplace. When those two things work in tandem, then we end up with inequities in the workplace that result from seemingly very neutral policies.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So then if I'm a manager, I'm listening to this podcast, I'm hearing about, these potentially kind of unwanted consequences of my managerial practices. Like, how could I think about these differently?
It's an excellent question. I think practically, first, just being aware that not having an intent to create gender difference does not ensure you against having this kind of outcome. So just being aware that seemingly neutral policies may result in differences by demographic groups, in this case by gender, and trying to gather real data on that. Other differences in your workplace that are related to these policies. The second thing to do is to, if there are these differences, and if you find them as a manager, it's good for the workers to understand that. It's good for men and women in the workplace to actually know that this is what's happening,
Right.
because it may help them figure out ways to adjust. Another step would be to facilitate ways for workers to share their approaches to how do they respond to these pressures, how do they respond to pressures to produce more, how do they balance quantity of their output with the quality of their work.
Yeah.
And as employees, as workers share their approaches, it may also become apparent to them that what they're doing is putting them at a disadvantage. And so imagining that these different strategies that men and women take in response to the same policies, if they knew about those strategies in terms of how to do their work, it's quite possible that there would be a self-adjustment that doesn't even require the intervention from management to take these inequities out of the equation.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess at some point too, like when you turn the pressure up, like there's a limit, and I guess at some point, or I don't know, does that factor in here too? Because I feel like maybe you reduce the amount of monitoring and incentives after a while if you feel like that either quality is dropping too much or people are taking more risk and there's just this inequity happening. Maybe it'd be time to reconsider that kind of approach.
It's a very good point that you're making, because oftentimes we deal with problems of trying to recruit more women, for example, into STEM fields, right? And if it's in the private sector, companies, let's say companies in the Silicon Valley, they've been struggling and failing for the most part for years and years to try to increase the share of women who work for them. And part of that could well be related to the incentives they have in place in terms of how they pay their workers and how do they reward particular approaches to work. And it could be that that less obvious aspect of how the job is designed is actually something that keeps this problem unresolved in terms of attracting more women to a particular occupation or particular types of work. So that it very well may be related to these other things, other manifestations of imbalance that we observe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because if they hear that a particular company puts a lot of pressure on their workers to pump out a lot of work instead of taking their time, like some people might be turned off by that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I guess there's a bit of an accessibility angle here too. Like I'm neurodivergent, like so I could see how these expectations might impact me in a way that's stressful. And but there's all these other markers of identity, diversity and identity as well. So I'm just curious if there's anything you can say. Like, do your findings imply anything for kind of maybe how these other kind of identity markers factor in these other life experiences?
Absolutely, this is a very good question because we happen to find the differences by gender in this particular context, but there's nothing in our theory that is specific to gender. What we argue on a more general level is that groups of workers that are demographically distinct may have different culturally informed expectations or perceptions of work and some features of work like pay, like quality control. And these seemingly neutral policies may well affect different demographic groups or different groups of different identities, different constraints maybe, in ways that create these inequities in a systematic way that put some groups at a disadvantage from the start, effectively. And I think recognizing that is a long-standing challenge for managers and for organizations. And this is the idea of a disparate impact rather than disparate treatment. And so understanding that, I think, really can inform a better way of designing jobs, a better way of organizing work, and effectively a workplace that is much more supportive and inclusive for organizations for whom that's the goal. I think that's the angle to pursue.
No, absolutely. I think it's nice to look, or nice. It's interesting to look at an angle that's, we always hear about these salary disparities between men and women, but it's just, it goes deeper than that. And I think these findings are a testament to that. So really important work. Professor Roman Galperin, thank you so much for sharing this with us, and keep up the great work. And I'm excited to see what other research you have going on in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.